Sure, my name's Dave Cormier. I'm the manager of student engagement and retention at the University of Prince Edward Island and an educational researcher. The term Maddock comes from the work of two French philosophers, Gilles Deleuze and Guattari, and they were talking about the ways in which knowledge doesn't respond the way that people think it does. So rather than knowledge being unified whole, rather it being something simple that can be identified and grabbed hold to, they thought of it more as a rhizome, as a plant that spreads, and when you break off little bits and pieces of it, it can grow somewhere else. Far more resilient in one sense, and also far more fragile than we normally think of knowledge. So from there, if you take that as a foundation, the idea of rhizomatic learning is approaching the learning process in the same way, as something that is disconnected, that is different, and where you're always starting in the middle. There's never a start to a learning process, there's never a finish to the learning process. You're always kind of growing and adapting and reacting to your environment. So if you take that as the foundation for what learning looks like, it really changes the way you develop curriculum, it changes the way you interact as a facilitator, and it changes what success looks like. A really good example is probably the way that most people learn how to parent. So parenting is one of those things that for some reason we're all allowed to do, and yet none of us seem to do it very well when we start out. And it's one of those things where you talk to some of your friends about it, you might read a couple of books about it, nowadays you might go on the internet and sort of follow some threads of thought, but there's no process where as a parent that I'm ever done, where the situation is always changing, my kids are always changing, my own perceptions of what success looks like as a parent are always changing. So we think of that as a very normal learning process and we accept it as being real. And yet, when we move to the classroom, suddenly that, what I would call natural learning process, we throw it out, right? Because you can't assess that and you can't have accountability around that in a way that bureaucracies like to have. So when I take that to a classroom and I'm talking to teachers about how to support openness for their students, a willingness to engage with others, a willingness to have your opinions criticized and challenged without responding negatively, so being positive to critical feedback. That kind of, where I'm trying to help teachers teach that to other people, that's an exploratory journey. Right, where we look at models of other people being open, we sort of assess our own feelings about being criticized ourselves and explore what it's like to be open ourselves. So when you put a teacher in a position where suddenly their educational thoughts are out in the open, it gives them an interesting sense of what it is for students. And then as they're doing it with other people, they're seeing how other people are responding to it. If you've got a classroom with 25 teachers, they're all going to have slightly different responses. And so what happens is that the community of learners, so all those 25 people, become the curriculum that we're learning, right? So we not only learn facts and simple things, we learn some of the complex fabric of what it is to know around that topic of openness and sort of being willing to engage with other people. When I look at, we were saying earlier today in one of the talks, I asked the same question I've asked thousands of people, which is if you were going to choose between somebody who you knew a lot of facts and somebody who you knew was going to work hard, which one would you choose to employ? And the universal answer is always the person who's going to work hard. So I think the first part about this is that this approach puts everybody in a situation where they need to work hard. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. You can't simply coast through because you know things. The process just doesn't allow it. So it really focuses on this idea of hard work, and I think that's a valuable skill for anybody to learn. The other piece that I think is really important for practical skills is the uncertainty. So you end up with a lot of students, and let's not talk about the students who struggle in school, talk about the students who do really well. You know, they go through a whole school system, maybe 20 years in a university, like by the time they're finished university, where they're accustomed to being graded and told when they're successful. My experience of the real world is I have yet to receive a grade in any of the things I've tried to do. That grading process doesn't happen in the real world. What we're confronted with are uncertainties. And whether that uncertainty is raising kids or whether that uncertainty is deciding which software program to or whatever it happens to be, Uncertainty is a regular part of everyday work life. It's a regular part of everyday home life. And if our school system is designed to help us confront the world, then to me, that uncertainty, overcoming uncertainty and still being able to decide, not get it right, but decide, that's critical. Absolutely a critical skill. And now, when we live in this sort of landscape of information abundance, maybe not knowledge abundance, but certainly information abundance, being able to decide between all the available pieces and sift through and make those kinds of steps, decisions, processes amongst all the choices available, absolutely critical for people to learn how to do. Or at least this week, I believe, that assessment is at the core of the problems we have with education. Because inevitably, when you end up in a conversation about what we're doing and how we're going to change the education system, somebody will say, well, how are we going to measure that? We're never going to be able to assess that. I've had 100 conversations with teachers or faculty who go, man, it would be so great to test that way, to do work that way, but I'd never have the time to grade all that work. So we limit ourselves over and over again, both in the complexity of the things we offer students, the volume we offer them, and the way in which we do it, because assessment is there. It's this sort of necessary evil. We have to decide whether or not people are right or not whenever they hand in an assignment. So my own feelings, first of all, it depends on the situation you're in. So sometimes we're totally structured into a place where we're forced to do a certain kind of assessment. But where the choice is available, my ideal choice is to not assess at all. In terms of whether or not somebody has done right or done wrong. I'll give you an example. 5 years ago, we were running a MOOC I was running it with George Siemens on the future of education. It was an open course, 2010, I think, and a faculty member at my university happened to join the course. And he met me walking across campus, and he looks at me and he says, I hated your course. I'm like, you hated it? What do you mean? Do you want your money back? It was a free course. Why did you hate it? And he goes, well, I didn't finish it. Like, okay, you didn't finish it. Can you tell me what your experience was about? And he looks at me and goes, well, I met this guy in the second week. And then by week 5, we weren't even paying attention to the course anymore. And we were working on this thing. And we went and presented a paper at a conference. And I didn't even finish the course. And I said, well, what you're telling me is that you came to something that I put on for free, first of all, but a course that we put on. You came to new ideas and conclusions. You made a new connection that totally helped you in a way that you wanted to be helped. You've succeeded. And he said, well, I didn't finish. Well, I don't care about whether you finished or whether you followed some particular path. Was it helpful for you? Did you learn? Did you move forward? So to me, that's the ideal scenario. When I teach inside of the university structure, I use learning contracts. So learning contracts come out of the 60s and 70s of educational theory, and that's about sitting down and negotiating a contract of work with each of your students. I have a modified version that I do because I lack the courage to do it the proper way. Doing full learning contracts with each student, I don't think my students are able to do it. Or certainly I can't teach them to do it. A better teacher maybe could do it. I can't, or at least not yet. So what we do is there are a number of assignments they can choose between. Each assignment has a certain percent. I have to give a percentage grade for my university. Each assignment might be worth 2 points, and you get pass-fail on an assignment. Either you've done it well, and I go, okay, or I go, that's terrible, you're gonna have to do that again. They can choose to resubmit 5 times if they want to. But what they do is they choose the number of assignments they're going to do. Let's say those number of assignments add up to 80 points. They're choosing an 80 for the course, assuming they do all the work and it's done up to spec. But that means that students are able to choose which assignments they want to work on. And more importantly for me, particularly working with adults, but even with students, with normal 18 to 22-year-old undergraduate university students, I find that they've already decided before they start the course what grade they want. I'm going to get a 70 in this course, that's all I need. I'd rather the student do fewer assignments and do them really well to that 70, rather than kind of do them all, half of this and a little bit of that, and kind of worked on that. And I find that taking this learning contract approach where the students commit to exactly what they're going to do, decide for themselves how they're going to go about doing it. One, it empowers them, puts the responsibility on them to choose. But I consistently see better work from students. What I don't have are the vast quantity of mediocre assignments, right? I get much, much better work. And it seems to work out better. I can imagine circumstances, and I was saying this today, I wouldn't teach academic writing this way, because academic writing is a brainwashing experiment. I'm teaching you to do it this way. So things that are in the simple or complicated domain, maybe not. But anything that deals with complexity, to me, giving people those choices is really important, because it mirrors the life that they're going to be leading after your course. And if they're going to be usefully using the things that you're discussing, that's how they're going to be. Nobody's going to grade them on how well they do this stuff after the course is done. So it better mirrors the real world. For me, the technology just provides the scale. So it allows people to connect with each other. It allows those connections to persist. And I think that the building of community through the use of technology is an incredibly useful way to learn. So, everybody's been to a conference, gets really super excited about all the stuff that's going on, and then they go home. And all the connections they made and all the conversations they made, unless they make a huge effort, they all get cut off. Let's say you have a really great course let's say you're using a content management system and you're in there using Moodle or something, and your students are all working together and whatever else, and then the course is done. All those connections are severed. The technology can make that happen. The other alternative, if you think of the web as content management system, which it is, it's an excellent content management system, then the connections that people make while they're learning can persist after the course is done. And then ideally, as a facilitator, what the technology allows me to do is make myself invisible. So if on the last day of a course that I teach, I am useless, I have done my job. That's always the way that I like to look at it. And really, it's a technology that facilitates that, the ability for people to maintain their connection and grow. The first MOOC, so-called, was taught by George Siemens and Stephen Downes in 2008. That summer, I had a conversation with George, a colleague of mine, and started talking about what they were doing. And their course went from 200 people signed up all the way up to 2,400 people signed up to it, which at the time was huge. And I said, well, it's a massive open online course. So I ended up coining the term and using it in a couple of conversations. And then we taught, I think it's between the three of us, Steve and George and I, about 10,000 students over the next couple of years in a variety of different formats, tried different ways of approaching it. For us, it was about how you can look at collaborative learning in these ways. Now, George and Stephen and I don't see it the same way. We all see it differently, actually. But that's what it was. They were experiments, right? It's exploring. In 2011, Sebastian Thrun decided to do the same thing at Stanford. He got 165,000 people there. But that original course was very different, right? It was first-year science course. It was intended to have people pick up specific skills, right? It was transmission style teaching rather than the sort of more constructivist kind of thing that we were doing with the CMOOCs. We're now called CMOOCs. The funny thing that happened with MOOCs becoming very popular is that the world seemed to have discovered online learning. It's as if all of a sudden it was possible to learn on the internet, even though we'd been doing it, and other people before me, for 20 years, right? So what it did do more than anything else, I don't think it's a revolution in education, because what a lot of people are doing is videos and like multiple choice questions. Not everybody, but a lot of it. What it is a revolution in the perception of online learning. So all of a sudden, people were being brought to strategic level tables inside of their organizations to talk about online learning. So where the director of an ICT lab would never get to the president's table, consistently since 2012 they have been. So were the people in the field that are in a much better position to make policy level decisions than they were 3 years ago. And that has really revolutionized the way that we do online learning, because now a lot more people have access to make change than they did before. So that's been the biggest impact, I think. The other one that I keep seeing pockets of it. I haven't seen it writ large yet, but I remember in 2012 I was in Sweden and they were talking about Swedish MOOCs. And the relevance of that was that they could start building stuff in Swedish on the internet, because they were finding that more and more stuff was moving to English. And there was less and less Swedish happening. Once you went to the web, it became English. So Dr. Kloos from Madrid, who I've worked with several times, has done some fantastic work at his university there, where they have done introductory work for students, but they've really committed to having more and more of that stuff in Spanish. And it's been, I think, I was talking to somebody from Greece this morning, where who did the first Greek MOOC, the people who did the first French MOOC from France. I think there's some really great cultural possibilities, and I think there's some really great professional development potential that really we haven't seen very much of yet. I think there was a MOOC done last year by Annette Dalsgaard for midwives. And there were 1,500 midwives from all over the world who got together to work on the field. Like, that's really exciting, right? Because it's not like they're going to a conference where it's going to end. There's a chance for it to grow and grow and grow, and I think there's something really powerful there. So maybe that becomes transformative. I don't think it is yet. They're just little pockets of change. So you have to understand where I come from culturally. So my hometown has 350 people in it, and it's 20 kilometers wide. Okay, so I come from the middle of nowhere, right, in Canada. Lots of people from Canada do, but I just happen to also. I grew up on the side of the ocean as a lobster. My parents are lobster fisher people. My father also worked at a local factory, but my father is the crazy person down the road who always did things differently. So there'd be a new pulley or a new innovation or a new way of pulling in a trap or a new something. And he was never satisfied with the way that it was done. My mother was my hockey coach and my baseball coach. It's incredibly unconventional. And so I grew up in this house where anything was possible. My father's favorite expression is, if any other idiot can do it, I can too, right? So I had this sort of upbringing where there were no limitations around you, what you could and couldn't do, and there was no limitations in terms of the possible for solving or doing something. So I came out of that house, and I'm a product of it. I'm a product of those parents. From there, I was a bad student, particularly in university. I didn't go to class my first couple of years. And then eventually started to understand what university was for. And nobody really explained it to me. And culturally, I didn't have any real sense. It took a long time for me to get there. So I spent a lot of time thinking about why we learn. And I had to, I was smart enough to carry myself through without doing any work until at some point you get to the point where you can't. So I had to sort of teach myself what education was for so I could convince myself to do it. So that's an important piece. And then I moved to South Korea right after I came out of university and taught there. And I had 270 writing students. And I have the organizational skills of like a mouse. I like chew up paper and shove it into the corner and stuff. I can't manage it. I've never been very good at it. And so I started using a discussion forum to keep track of student stuff. And then I was like, oh, so like at the end of term, I just hit that person's name and see all of their assignments? That's way better than that filing cabinet. And then I started technologically from there. And because I did, I started getting asked to come and help another person. And then I started getting contracts to go do that stuff and bits and pieces, right? So then I started consulting. And again, that process of consulting for other people forces you to go. They get down to the sort of, why are you doing this? What's it for? And a constant recycling of the purpose of education has been a sort of a consistent theme for me. And then I read Deleuze and Guattari for the first time, started getting into some of the postmodern French thought, which got me thinking again about how we just seem to be repeating these strange things over and over again, and why are we doing them? All of that sort of comes together for me with starting to work online, doing EdTech Talk. So EdTech Talk was a live interactive webcast that we did. We did about 500 shows, hour-long shows, with people from all over the world. And we tried to solve each other's problems. And what happened is that I would go to a meeting at my university and somebody say, oh, about this, and I go, oh, da, 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 da. And I was like, well, how is it that I seem to know the answers to these questions? It wasn't because I'd studied them. It's because I lived inside this community. And I realized that the membership in the community was all I needed to be a professional in that field. So being able to participate and continued participation was both the process and the outcome, right? And then we tried the first MOOC because we were trying to do it on purpose. How can you build a community tomorrow, right? It turns out really hard, not really dependable. But it's that sort of trying to, once I understood that you could learn this way, I've spent the last 10 years trying to figure out the talk I did today, right? So what are the pieces? Complexity, really important piece. The history of education and how we got here with content and stuff, to me, really important piece. And then a new model for thinking to get away from the plucked apple view of knowledge, important piece. And then practical models, like how do you actually get it done and how do you make it so that students understand that process. So it's been a continuous sort of learning journey for the last, well, however many years. I got here a couple days ago. I've learned to get to a place a day early so that the jet lag doesn't slow me down too much. But I had a chance to look around Seville. It's been fantastic. The conference here has been so nicely organized. Sorry, I know that's not the question you're asking, but I'm just saying it's been really well organized. But the response I've been getting has been really interesting because I had 5 people in a row come to talk to me after my talk, and they were all from different countries. And they all had different perspectives that they were bringing to the conversation. You know, I've been doing this thing, and I don't know if this will work in my country, and there's this problem we have. And it was one after another, right? That's amazing. Like, that's such a great experience for me to be able to share what I think I've learned with people, get that sort of diversity of response, and a passion of response too, right? People are really engaged. And, you know, and that's another thing. And, oh, we'll talk about this later, and let's go have a drink later, and we'll talk about this. That's what you want. That's why I come to a place like this, right? Is I want to be able to take my stuff, put it out in front of people, have them tell me why it's right. Most of the things I've learned doing this have been people going, you never thought about this way. You know, I was talking earlier about how I get my students to choose their grades. It's one of my students who taught me to do that. He came up to me after and goes, you know, I like your course. Your problem is this. That's what you want. That constant sort of reevaluation. And I think so far already today I've had a lot of that. And that's all you can wish for from any conference.